بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي. ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في غزة وفي الدفاع وفي لبنان وفي اليمن وفي العراق وفي إيران وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في غزة وفي لبنان وفي اليمن وفي السودان وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم نفس كربنا كربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين. وصلى وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين آمين ثم آمين. So fascism, it propounds irrationality and particularity in contrast to rationality and universality. Now this is a very loaded claim. We need to spend some time to decipher it and to dissect it. Now it's a common claim to attribute irrationality to fascism and Nazism, for example. And the concept of rationality is a complicated concept, so it's not very easy to assess the claim, but it's a common claim nonetheless. Now, rationality, the attribution of irrationality will depend on our conception of rationality, obviously. Now, you can look at rationality at the formal level or at the substantive level. There are many ways, or the many ways we can divide the concept of rationality and its different dimensions, but this is one of them, very important one. Formal concept of rationality and substantive concept of rationality. And substantive concept of rationality in this context would assess the ends, the values of fascism, for example. The value of, for example, worshipping nation, or considering national self as the real self. An individual self can only be real as if it understands itself in relation to and constituted by that national self. These sort of values or power, or the value of amassing power to establish the hegemony of a nation, or the view that one nation, a particular nation, for example, Italian nation or German nation, is a special nation. These sort of views, and obviously there are values behind these views, you can't assess them based on formal rationality, because these are substantive claims. They can only be assessed through a substantive rationality. So the question whether the ends of fascisms are rational or not can only be assessed based on some sort of a substantive rationality which is neutral as to different claims. But I don't think there's any such substantive rationality. So you can only assess the rationality or irrationality of fascist values based on some other view or values of substantive rationality. For example, based on Islam or Christianity or liberalism, etc. But in that case, you are assuming the truth of these substantive, or at least rationality of those views. But then obviously you would have to define the rationality of those views based on some further concept. So that's an infinite regress. So you can call fascism irrational from the perspective of substantive rationality. But those concepts, substantive rationality, but there's not much not much value in such a claim, because you are really just saying that for me fascism and its values are wrong based on a wrong conception of reality. But these are then fundamental worldview questions which cannot be decisively adjudicated based on a neutral conception of substantive rationality. I mean, you can always adduce reason for or against, but those reasons will make sense only in a context, in a particular context, and depending on your context, it might appeal to you or not. But that you can't prove the rationality of that context itself. So, in my view, it doesn't make sense to say that fascism is irrational as to its. You can say it's right or wrong, depending on what I believe to be right. So, from Islamic perspective, for us, it is the perspective because it is the truth. But we can't decisively prove the truth of Islam. We will have to somehow ultimately believe in it. And similarly, if you are a liberal, you might believe that your view is correct, but you can't give us a decisive proof of the truth of liberalism without presupposing liberalism. So you can do that. So as a Muslim, I reject fascism, but that doesn't mean that I think that fascism is irrational. I just think that as to its goal and values, it's wrong. And it's false. But its falsehood, I can't decisively prove based on any transcendental conception of substantive rationality. Okay, so that's just the nature of rationality. So that's why I think calling fascism irrational as to its values and its worldview doesn't make much sense to me. Now, if we come to formal rationality, Formal rationality means formal rationality judges procedures, for example. So given certain aims and purposes, we can ask whether the procedures we are adopting are rational or non-rational or irrational, depending on the situation, given my purposes or aims. And also, there's another way you can judge rationality of formal rationality of movements like fascism is through outcome. So given the goals they have, goals in this world, obviously, they have set themselves. Through the outcome, we can say that they are rational or irrational. But I think focusing on outcome is also misleading, because many a times it's possible that you have rational strategy, but the outcome is at the end not in your favor. So just because you are defeated doesn't mean that you are irrational. I mean, sometimes it can mean you are irrational, but the luck and other contingent factors are always there. So that's why it's not very advisable to judge the rationality or irrationality of any movements, any ideas based on outcomes. Now, the last thing is the procedures. Now, procedures you can call, I think, procedural rationality is that given your goals, you take stock of causal what's the word I'm looking for? Causal. You take into consideration causal imperatives. You look at information. You look at different options, and given cause and effect, given experience, you choose a strategy which is best suited to the information and the probability of causal connections and all those things. And the second thing is, in order to adopt a strategy, you go through deliberation and all those things. Now, one way you can accuse fascism or Nazism as irrational, because it is claimed that they depend on the views of one person, like, for example, Hitler or Mussolini. So they don't take their decisions or adopt strategies based on deliberation among actors involved, different institutions involved, different leaderships involved, for example, military and political, etc. Depending on the nature of the decisions and the nature of the arena, etc. And I don't know whether Mussolini's fascist movement was irrational in any of its decisions. But generally, for example, for Hitler, it's claimed that he took a lot of military decisions on its own without deliberation. But generally, the historians I trust reject these claims, and most of the strategies adopted by Hitler was after consultations, after wide consultations, and those were not irrational. And obviously, both fascist and Nazi parties believed in causal connection. They didn't rely on miracles or anything like that. They developed militaries, and they developed technology, and they amassed powers and armies, etc. So they believed in power, and they believe in the saturation of power, amassing powers. So how can you say that they didn't believe in causal connections, etc.? I think a lot of time people think that they were irrational movements because they were ultimately defeated. But the outcome can be the result of a lot of things like accidents, and like a lot of people think that Japanese strategy before World War II was irrational. But if you look in depth at their strategies, given their circumstances and goals, it's not necessarily come out to be irrational. So personally, I mean, it doesn't make much sense to call fascist movement irrational movement in any acceptable sense of the word, except if you think that it is irrational because it is based on ideas and values which are wrong and not true. And firstly, you can't really decisively educate those claims based on some neutral conception of substantive rationality. And the second thing is collapsing the concept of rationality into irrationality, or irrationality into truth and falsehood. I don't think is a good idea. It's a conceptually defensible idea, unless you just want to show your disgust or hatred or dislike of some movement, so you call it irrational. So be it. Then that won't be any claim, but more like what emotivists say, that is just you use when you're calling somebody irrational, you just say that I don't like, but there's no cognitive value of that claim as such. Okay, so I think we can stop here today, and next time we can look at the other claim, universality and particularity, and finish off the entry with that. Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين.